The champagne glass trembled in my hand as Jessica's words echoed through our family's dining room. "I'm treating everyone to Hawaii." The golden liquid rippled against crystal as my parents erupted in praise around the mahogany table I'd helped them buy. My throat closed completely when Jessica caught my eye across the flickering candles and mouthed, "Thank you," with that practiced smile she'd perfected since childhood. The room suddenly felt airless despite the ceiling fan spinning overhead. I could taste copper on my tongue as the reality crystallized. She was claiming credit for the $12,000 vacation I'd been secretly planning and paying for over the past 3 months. "My name is Rose. I'm 28, and I'm a marketing analyst who spent most of her life being the invisible sister. This is the story of how I finally made myself seen." Growing up in Los Angeles, our family dynamic never made sense to outsiders. Jessica was the storm, loud, dramatic, magnetic in ways that made my parents light up whenever she entered a room. I was the steady one, the problem solver, the daughter they turned to when things needed handling, but never when celebrating happened. By the time I hit my 20s, I'd perfected the art of loving people who saw me as furniture. Useful, reliable, but not worth noticing unless something needed fixing. The pattern was so ingrained that when Jessica announced her Hawaii surprise, I actually laughed along with everyone else. But sitting there, watching my father tear up with pride while my mother squeezed Jessica's hand, something cracked inside my chest. Not anger, something deeper. The sudden understanding that I'd become complicit in my own invisibility. The Hawaii idea had started innocently enough. 3 months earlier, I'd overheard my parents discussing how they'd never taken a real vacation, how Dad's back problems made traveling seem impossible, how they worried about being a financial burden if they asked for help. That weekend, I'd started researching accessible resorts, calculating costs, planning the perfect family getaway. I'd booked premium flights with extra legroom for Dad, ocean view rooms so Mom could watch sunrises like she'd dreamed about since I was little, a ground floor suite for Jessica, because she'd mentioned needing space when she was stressed, activities that would work for everyone, restaurants my parents had mentioned wanting to try, excursions that accommodated Dad's mobility issues. Every reservation went on my credit card. Every detail reflected months of research into what would make each family member happiest. Every choice was made with love, even if that love felt increasingly one-sided. But watching Jessica bask in praise for her generosity while I sat unacknowledged, I finally understood what I'd been denying for years. In my family, love was conditional on invisibility. They appreciated what I did as long as I never asked for recognition. The weeks leading up to the trip felt different this time. When Jessica posted Instagram stories about treating the family to paradise, I didn't deflect the comments asking how she could afford such generosity. When my parents bragged to neighbors about their youngest daughter's success, I didn't correct the narrative. I just watched, taking mental notes of every assumption, every misplaced credit, every moment my contributions were erased. By departure morning, something had shifted inside me. Not resentment exactly, but clarity. Crystal clear understanding of my worth versus their perception of it. Standing in LAX Terminal 4 that morning, I was double-checking our boarding passes when Jessica's voice cut through the ambient airport noise. "Why do you always have to control everything? Can't you just let me handle my own trip?" The irony hit me like ice water. Her trip. Her trip that existed because of my credit score, my planning, my money, my sacrifice. But before I could respond, she stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss meant only for me. "You're so pathetic, always trying to take credit for things. This is my gift to the family, not yours. Stop trying to make it about you." The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. The crack echoed through the terminal like a dropped tray, and suddenly 200 travelers were staring at us. My cheek blazed with heat, but what burned worse was watching my parents rush toward us with expressions I'd seen 1,000 times. Frustrated disappointment aimed squarely at me. "What did you do to upset your sister?" Dad's voice carried that familiar tone of exhausted authority. Before I could even touch my burning cheek, Mom was wrapping Jessica in protective arms while glaring at me like I was the problem. "She's been ruining everything all morning," Jessica sobbed into Mom's shoulder. "I just wanted to do something nice for everyone, and she keeps trying to make it about her." Standing there, surrounded by staring strangers, feeling the sting of Jessica's hand and the sharper pain of my parents' automatic assumption of my guilt, every memory came flooding back with perfect clarity. The graduation party I'd quietly funded while Jessica gave a speech thanking Mom and Dad. The apartment deposit I'd co-signed so Jessica could claim independence on social media. The engagement ring I'd loaned money for that Jessica kept when the relationship ended. Years of birthdays where I bought gifts from both of us because Jessica was always broke or overwhelmed or busy. And now this, Hawaii, my love letter to our family, being claimed by the daughter who hadn't contributed a single dollar while I was blamed for threatening her stolen moment of glory. "Apologize," Dad commanded, stepping between us like a referee. "Do it properly." For 28 years, I'd apologized. For things I hadn't done. For reactions I hadn't caused. For simply existing in spaces where my presence complicated Jessica's narrative. I'd apologized so automatically that it had become reflex. But standing there with my cheek throbbing and my parents' disappointed faces turned toward me like searchlights, something inside me went perfectly still. Not angry, calm, focused, clear. "I need a minute," I said quietly. Dad waved dismissively. "Fine, but don't wander off. Boarding starts soon." Jessica sniffled dramatically. "Just keep her away from me." I walked toward the restrooms slowly, deliberately, like someone gathering herself after a blow she should have seen coming. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My breathing had steadied. By the time I reached a quiet corner near the vending machines, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. Every confirmation was right there. Flights, hotel, rental car, activities, restaurant reservations, travel insurance. My name, my card, my account numbers. Not Jessica's name anywhere except as a passenger I'd added to my reservations. The airline app opened smoothly. Our reservation appeared with 4 seats, 4 names, 1 payment method. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was beating with perfect, purposeful rhythm. I tapped the customer service number and waited. A professional voice answered. "Thank you for calling. How can I assist you today?" "I need to make some changes to a reservation," I said, my voice steady as granite. "Cancel 3 tickets. Keep only Rose Morrison." The agent was efficient, helpful, sympathetic to the family emergency that required sudden changes. Within minutes, Jessica, Mom, and Dad had vanished from the passenger manifest. The refund would hit my account within 24 hours. Next came the hotel reservation. 2 adjoining rooms, 4 guests, ocean views my parents had dreamed about. "Change it to 1 room, 1 guest," I told the cheerful representative, who promised the downgrades would result in a partial refund. The rental car took 30 seconds. Luxury SUV Jessica had insisted on becoming a compact sedan, perfect for solo exploration. Activities for 4 becoming activities for 1. Restaurant reservations shrinking from a family table to a peaceful table for 1. With each cancellation, I felt pieces of myself returning. Parts I'd given away so gradually I hadn't noticed their absence until this moment when they came flooding back. When I finished, I wasn't the woman who'd been slapped in an airport. I was someone I hadn't been in years. Rose Morrison, adult, independent, finally in control of her own narrative. Walking back toward Gate 76, the terminal looked different. Not hostile or overwhelming, just neutral. Like the world had stopped tilting against me and found its balance. My family was exactly where I'd left them. Jessica scrolling her phone, probably checking her makeup. Mom digging through her purse for something. Dad reading news on his tablet. They looked peaceful, settled, like the crisis had passed now that the problematic daughter had removed herself. I stepped into their line of sight and said calmly, "I'm heading to my gate now." Mom looked up, confused. "What? This is your gate?" Not anymore. Jessica's head snapped up from her phone. "What are you talking about?" I held up my phone, screen facing them. "I canceled your tickets, all 3 of them." The silence that followed was total, complete. Like the terminal itself had stopped breathing. Dad stood slowly. "You what?" Jessica grabbed my phone, staring at the confirmation screen like it was written in hieroglyphics. No. This isn't real. Why would you do this?" "Because it's my trip," I said simply. "Always was." You didn't book this, Jessica's voice cracked, the performance finally slipping. I announced it. I invited everyone. With what money? I asked quietly. Check with the airline if you don't believe me. Dad was already dialing, his voice tight as he recited our confirmation code to customer service. Jessica hovered beside him, shaking her head, whispering, "She's lying. She's lying," like a prayer. But when the agent confirmed only one remaining passenger, Rose Morrison, Jessica's face crumbled. Dad lowered the phone with surgical precision. How could you do this to your family? I didn't do this to my family, I replied. My family did this to me. For years. I showed them my phone screen. Hotel cancellation, rental car downgrade, activity modifications, every piece of their vacation dissolving into refunds that would land in my account. The account that had funded their dreams while funding none of my recognition. Mom stepped forward, tears gathering. Rose, please, we can fix this. Don't leave us here. You have credit cards, I said gently. You have jobs. You have the same options everyone else has when they want to take a vacation. We can't afford new tickets, she whispered. I know, I answered. That's exactly why I was paying in the first place. Jessica grabbed my arm, desperation replacing drama. I'm sorry, Rose. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. Please don't do this. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. 26 years old, beautiful, charismatic, talented in her way, and completely unprepared for a world where actions had consequences. When do you start thinking clearly, Jessica? When do you start being responsible for your choices? There was no cruelty in my voice, no malice or satisfaction, just truth, spoken plainly without the cushioning I'd provided for decades. The boarding announcement chimed overhead. Now boarding Group A for Honolulu. My group? Dad stepped directly in front of me, his face flushed with anger and something that looked like panic. If you get on that plane, don't expect to come home. I met his eyes without flinching. I'm not the one who left, Dad. You did that a long time ago when you decided one daughter mattered more than the other. I stepped around him. Nobody tried to stop me. At the gate, the agent scanned my boarding pass and glanced at my face, probably noticing the lingering redness from Jessica's slap. Rough morning? She asked quietly. I smiled, and it felt genuine for the first time in hours. Getting better by the minute. Walking down the jet bridge, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders with every step. When I reached my seat, premium window, extra legroom, the comfort I'd chosen for myself before I knew how much I'd need it, golden sunlight was streaming through the aircraft windows. As we pushed back from the gate, I glanced through the terminal glass one final time. My family was still there. Jessica pacing frantically while gesturing at gate agents. Mom crying into her hands. Dad arguing with someone in uniform like he could force reality back into the shape he wanted. They looked lost, like actors who'd forgotten their lines when the script suddenly changed. The plane lifted off, carrying me toward azure waters and the first vacation I'd ever taken, where I wouldn't spend a single moment managing someone else's happiness. 5 days of snorkeling, hiking, eating alone without apology, reading books on the beach, exploring at my own pace. My phone buzzed constantly during the flight, calls, texts, voicemails ranging from tearful apologies to furious accusations. I turned it off somewhere over Nevada and kept it off until I was standing on my hotel balcony watching the sunset over the Pacific. After landing in Honolulu and checking into my hotel, the silence felt like luxury. When I finally listened to the messages, the evolution was fascinating. Anger had transformed into bargaining, bargaining into pleading, pleading into the kind of genuine reflection I'd been hoping to see for years. The letter from my parents arrived at my apartment while I was still in Hawaii. 2 pages, handwritten, acknowledging patterns they'd never wanted to see, admitting favoritism they'd justified as protecting Jessica's sensitive nature, recognizing how they'd taken my strength for granted while enabling her weakness. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, not out of anger, but because for the first time in my adult life, I had the luxury of choosing when and how to respond. That trip taught me something I'd never learned in 28 years of trying to earn love through sacrifice. Peace doesn't come from keeping everyone else comfortable. It comes from finally choosing yourself. When I returned from Hawaii, I found 17 voicemails and 43 text messages waiting. The progression told a clear story. Initial anger gave way to confusion, then genuine concern, and finally something I'd never heard from my family before: accountability. Jessica's final message was 2 minutes of sobbing apology, admitting she'd never paid for anything we'd done together, that she'd been too scared to acknowledge how much I'd sacrificed for her image. Dad called to say he'd spent 3 days thinking about every time he'd dismissed me to protect Jessica's feelings, and that he was ashamed of the pattern he'd allowed to continue. Our first family dinner after I returned was different. Jessica arrived with receipts. She'd paid for the meal, the first time she'd ever covered an expense for all of us. She looked directly at me when she spoke, instead of performing for our parents. Dad asked about my trip details instead of rushing past my experiences to more comfortable topics. Mom sat beside me instead of automatically positioning herself as Jessica's emotional buffer. The rebuilding isn't complete, and it's not always easy. Jessica still catches herself defaulting to dramatics when she doesn't get her way, but now she stops mid-performance and acknowledges what she's doing. My parents still occasionally slip into their old protective patterns, but when I point it out, they course-correct instead of getting defensive. We've established new rules: no financial gifts without clear acknowledgement of who paid, no taking credit for others' planning or work, and no more automatic assumptions about who's wrong when conflict arises. Most importantly, I learned to maintain the boundary I set that day at LAX. My worth isn't determined by how much I sacrifice. My value isn't proven by how much I endure. And choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Setting that boundary wasn't cruel. It was survival. And sometimes, survival looks like canceling tickets and choosing yourself for the very first time.